Good day and welcome to another edition of One-on-One with Swope Health. I am your host, Eric Wesson. Thanks so much for joining us today. Got a great show planned for you. Our guest today is Marvin Lyman. He is a community organizer and developer right here in Kansas City, Missouri. Marvin, thanks so much for joining us today.
Eric, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, tell us about Marvin. Where are you from? Where you go to school? Where you go to church?
Oh, man, let me see if I can cover all that quickly. So, first and foremost, I'm a husband, I'm a father. I'm from Kansas City, Missouri, born and raised. Was fortunate that my family had a small business that many people may know, Papa Lou's. So we had that for about 31 years and literally was raised in the restaurant business. So I really got the honor and privilege of living in two neighborhoods, if you will, one at 4308 Forest, and then in the 18th and Vine area where our restaurant was birthed for the first 12 years. And so ended up going to Lincoln High School. So I am a proud Blue Tiger like my daughters. And then we went off to college at St. Cloud State University in St. Cloud, Minnesota, where we majored in education, came back, actually taught at Genesis Charter Alternative School when it was an alternative school for about 6 years. And then went back into the restaurant business full time, expanded the restaurant, moved us down to the Gates Plaza, and then ultimately transitioned into economic development and real estate development to try to make some even greater impact on our community. So that's kind of who we are in a nutshell.
Okay, yeah. Two daughters.
So technically I have 6 children. Okay. I have a godson who's in Florida, DeVale. He's in the Navy. He's an officer in the Navy. We have a 30-year-old, my wife and I, son who's here in Kansas City. Unfortunately, just over a year and a half ago, we lost our then 27-year-old son to gun violence here in Kansas City. We have a 25-year-old daughter who is still studying at Prairie View A&M and works here locally as well. And then the 2 daughters that are, one is a freshman. Well, she just completed her freshman year, Marvin Lyman. Who completed her freshman year at Howard University, and when she returns in the fall, she'll actually be a junior, thanks to all of her coursework at Lincoln College Prep. And then my baby girl, who is a phenomenal artist and brilliant scholar as well, Morgan Lyman. She will be at DePaul University in the fall as a freshman.
Oh, she's getting out of the HBCU realm.
Yeah. So she's, we thought she was going to go to Hampton University, be on the East Coast with her sister, but she loves Chicago. Okay. And so she wants to be in that environment, and she's an artist. So that environment is probably the best for her in terms of her pursuits of marketing as well as her pursuit as an artist. Yeah.
Okay. Now that Madison, I've seen that name somewhere before.
I have too. There's a newspaper around here. Yeah, I think it's called the Next Page KC or something like that allows her to write.
Yeah, and she's doing great work. I get a lot of positive feedback, especially with her being so young. Young people, that's the next generation, and that's where I want to pass the torch on to, because I don't want to keep doing this.
Well, you know what? I have to commend you, not just because she's my daughter, but for giving young people an opportunity, because you've given other young people opportunities to write, as well as even community members an opportunity to write and share their opinions and expertise. And, one thing we haven't done well in our community, from our perspective, is build a bench.
Right.
And when you look at other communities, they do a great job of building the bench, right, so you know who's coming next, and they're well prepared to seize that opportunity so that those communities don't lose continuity in whatever efforts that they're pursuing.
Yeah, and that's very, very important. So some of the development projects you have, 63rd Street, we want to talk about that later. But the most recent one you kind of spearheaded was the Prospect Corridor. And so you put together the people that need to be a part of the team. You had great community input and support for that. So tell us about what the ultimate goal is with that project.
Yeah, very good. So the Prospectus KC plan is an equitable transit-oriented development plan that was pursued by the city of Kansas City, Missouri, and KCATA. They got actually a federal grant to actually study the corridor and then to come up with recommendations. They had a lot of community input, but unfortunately, what I saw, Eric, after they were into this study for about a year, that people who were actually practitioners in economic development and real estate development from our community weren't participating. They hadn't been solicited. And there's nothing wrong with getting the expertise and opinions and views of lay members of the community, because that's absolutely needed. But when it came to the technical implementation of how this plan would actually impact people physically from an architectural and environmental design perspective, but even from an economic perspective, that was missing. And so I got a 911 call from a community member, Lamar Vickers, that said, hey, need you to be, why aren't you at this meeting? Need you to be at this meeting. And I dropped everything. I went to the meeting and I heard what was going to be implemented. And I asked the question. I said, how does this benefit black people? Mm-hmm. And just like that, it was silence. You could hear a rat licking on ice because none of the folks had an answer. And eventually I got a call from Scott Bernstein, one of the consultants out of Chicago, who called me and said, hey, Marvin, I got your number and I want you to know your question was absolutely right. I've been trying to push this agenda, but no one is listening. Whatever I can do to help you, I will. From that point, we began to pray and to formulate a strategy of how do we get all of the right people in the room and resources to really be part of this plan and not have this plan happen to us. Mm-hmm. So that was in 2022. So in 2023, we were able to launch the Heartland Equitable Development Symposium. We brought together emerging black developers, intermediate black developers, and advanced black developers locally, and even some from nationally and regionally. And in addition, we brought in the Kauffman Foundation and other area foundations, the banks, private equity groups, HUD, MHDC, the city of Kansas City, all these different agencies that say, they want to impact equity in our community. And we began to explore a couple things. One was the Prospect Corridor Plan, because at that time, it was approximately a $4 billion economic development plan. Mm-hmm. And then the second thing we wanted to do was to upskill our emerging and intermediate developers by having practitioners and other resources available to make sure that there were workshops that could actually give them the knowledge and skills that they needed as they were advancing. The third thing we wanted to do in that symposium was to affect policy. So we needed our advanced black development community there and advanced resource partners there so that we could talk about, those barriers to financing, those barriers to providing guarantees and being able to make development happen in our community the way that it needs to happen to have the real impact. It's one thing to say you want affordable housing, but it's another thing in terms of actually providing the resources to make it happen and making sure that folks that look like you and I can actually own, develop, manage, and employ versus having other people come in the city or other entities give them all the subsidies and incentives for them to do it, but don't do the same thing for us.
Mm-hmm. So with the plan, when we look at the city and we, go through volumes and volumes and volumes of plans, what makes this one different? Because we have plans for days, but they sit on the shelf, and then somebody come along 5 or 10 years from now, implement a plan, and it looks like something brand new. So what is making this project different from any of the rest of them?
I think what makes this one different is that you have the community now engaged at a level that I don't think we've ever had. That's number one. Number two, I think we've got political will on our side. So what's different in this area plan as opposed to others in our community is that we were able to work with Melissa Robinson and to say, Melissa, this plan can't be passed and have zero fiscal impact, because we know what that means is this plan will go in a basement, it'll go on a shelf, it'll be lost, it'll collect dust, and nothing will happen. The other thing we said is that we need this plan to have an ordinance connected to it that actually establishes a community benefits agreement. So back in February, she introduced this language with the adoption of the plan, and it gave us 90 days to put together a community benefits agreement. Now, we were supposed to work in conjunction with the city to draft this community benefits agreement. I will tell you that process was difficult because it was priority for us, but it didn't seem to be priority for others.
Right.
So we took it upon ourselves, Eric, and we drafted the community benefits agreement. We sought help from our friend Scott Bernstein there in Chicago, who gave us some input on the plan. But what you will see in that community benefits agreement came literally from black folks on the east side that know what we need, and it came from also black folks who had the technical expertise to implement the plan. And so the second term within the plan calls for a corridor manager for the implementation of the plan. It also calls for $500 million in investment from the city of Kansas City. And then it calls for this process or the plan to be implemented under the Economic Development Corporation of Kansas City. And so we got great buy-in there. We got an approval of that here in this month, actually, from the city of, in May, we got approval of that second term from the community benefits agreement, which now makes way for us to get the entire community benefits agreement approved. But the other thing that we have that I think makes this plan different, because we got great leadership at EDC and Tracy Lewis. And so Tracy, he could have shunned this whole expansion of work that will come over to EDC because they've had their share of challenges. But what he looked at was, hey, how can the EDC, what is the role of EDC, and how can I make sure EDC is doing its part to not only help the black community, but in helping the black community helps the entire city. And so we've got more support and synergy amongst people and organizations than I've seen us had in this regard.
So you bring up an interesting point when you talk about political will, because that's one of my favorite terms. So political will, we got Melissa Robinson, and we've got this mayor and council for another 2 years.
Yeah.
So what keeps the political wheel rolling for the next council? Because the next mayor comes in, the next council, this might not be a priority for them. So how do we maintain this being on the forefront? That's
a great question. So the first thing that we have to do is everything that gets approved has to be by ordinance, because then it becomes law. That's number one. The second thing is that this council, this mayor and this council has to commit to funding by ordinance and making sure that funding is locked in for this $500 million and any other monies that are needed for.
So $500 million for how long?
It's $500 million over 10 years.
So, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And so just like, if you look at, and again, no knock to this particular project I'm going to mention, but in the Northland, there is a workforce development center that was given $500,000 for the pre-development. Then the council came back and gave them $29.5 million. But what was so interesting was the language in that ordinance. The language in that ordinance directed the city manager to fill any financial gaps and to make sure on day one of that fiscal budget that those dollars were available to the developer. So we need that same type of language and commitments to the Prospect Corridor Plan, and we don't need our 3rd District or 5th District representatives to settle for anything less, because they have, our council members from our districts, they have approved and supported other plans in other areas and projects in other areas. We need that same language embedded in any ordinance that supports a 5th District, 3rd District project. That's what will make it secure when the new council comes on.
And you bring that up, but I have to say this because I wrote my editorial about it this week, or last week's paper. When they did that workforce development project for the Northland, I didn't see anybody from the Northland in the audience. But when we have projects, we have to make sure that we get people out from the community to flood the, KC tenants. They have to get all these people out there just to make a showing, but these other areas don't. I just digressed there for a minute.
Well, you're right. The expectation is different. And so if we're not seen in the audience, then, well, we don't think it's a priority for the community.
Right.
Well, we have jobs just like everybody else, folks in the Northland. I'm fortunate that God has blessed me to have a level of flexibility, and with my partners at CJR Development Partners, based in Washington D.C., I have the flexibility where I can go to City Council on a Tuesday or on a Thursday or whenever and attend community meetings. Everyone doesn't have that flexibility, so to have that requirement in itself is unjust.
Right. Yeah. Right. I totally agree, because they don't have to do that.
No.
And since the council works for us, we should be able to tell them, hey, we need this. Here's our plan. Go implement it. Rather than have to be in the audience making testimony. But anyway, I digress. So this project is going to come into fruition, and it is going to consist of housing. There's a big aspect of it that's jobs, but workforce development. I think that's a thing that we don't really talk about. We talk about minority participation, but minority participation on the levels of contracts for professional services. My theory is that workforce minority participation, specifically black people, and I know you can't say that, but there's a way to do that.
Absolutely.
That's where the money is spent in the black community. When you say minorities and you have in these jobs 80% of the people being Hispanic, that money leaves out of the urban core, and that has places like Sunfresh struggling for cash flow because we build these places. They build these places, and then people in the urban core sustain them, and that's not really fair. So is there an aspect of the community benefits agreement that mandates participation from the urban core?
Absolutely. So what we propose in the community benefits agreement is a holistic plan that addresses not only the economics, but even the health disparity and so many other conditions that's facing our community. But the workforce development piece is absolutely critical. So one, what we know is that black companies hire black people. So we got to start with making sure we're hiring black companies, that we are contracting black companies. So we have upwards of 40% requirement. Now we know we're going to have to do some language finagling or whatever that's needed or whatnot.
Training.
Yeah, but we've got language in the community benefits agreement that's saying 40% of the contracts at a minimum need to go to black companies. And then we also have workforce requirement, job training, skill enhancement, and even partnerships with not only local companies, but even with the unions, to say that if you want to be part of this, then you've got to have a real plan so that our people aren't waiting on the bench to get on a job, and then you putting on them, giving them the worst part of the work, and then giving them the least critical parts of the work, if you will. So now they're off the job early, and they only make a little bit of money.
Right.
We have to hold true to what we're demanding in the community benefits agreement, that our people have to have the jobs, our people have to have the contracts, and then our community has to hold us accountable, whether it's myself if I'm a contractor developer on the project, or if it's someone else that looks like us or doesn't look like us. We got to hold us accountable, because at the end of the day, nobody is coming to rescue us. It's only going to be us that's going to lift us up, and we got to have the same demands we're putting out for everybody else. We got to have the same demands internally.
Okay, and so your other project that you have is 63rd Street.
Yes, sir.
Let's see, that's been 12 years, 14 years in the making. And another question that I have before we go into that, why does it take so long for projects to get developed and groundbreaking and actual bulldozers on the ground with projects in the black community? Why does it take so long?
Wow, that could be a whole show. So
I know land acquisition is one thing, but
you got land acquisition. Sometimes the agreements between the developer and the city in terms of land acquisition is phased, whereas in other projects outside of the east side, that land acquisition is not phased. From a developer's perspective, here's why that's problematic. If I have to do all of the site work for all of 63rd and Prospect, and I only own part of the site, but I'm responsible for doing everything, I can't come in and do this and put one sewer in, one water line in. I have to be able to do like they do every other site. And have an economy of scale. I've got to come in and do the entire infrastructure first and put that in. When you piecemeal the acquisition to me because you don't trust me as a black developer, then you make it harder for me to get financing, because who is going to finance me doing work on land I do not own? Right. Or that I may own at some future date. But what happens if things change, such as COVID? The other thing that happens is some of the lending, or I don't even want to get to lending yet. Let me talk about city commitments. It's a difference when you look at Samara Road and you look at the city saying we're going to put in $20 million up front. Well, when you have that kind of commitment up front, it's easy to go to the private capital markets as a developer. We typically don't get that type of commitment from the city to give us those public dollars for use for infrastructure in other areas. And so you will say, well, Marvin, you have a TIF for 63rd and Prospect. We do tax increment financing, which is a bond issue, but I've got to have the retail and the tax revenue that will ultimately pay back those bonds. So you're asking me to go get tenants in an area that's been disinvested for 70 plus years, where I don't have a city commitment on infrastructure, that upfront commitment, and you're asking me, and then you want to piecemeal the land to me. Tell me how that can work. Those are the types of hurdles that black developers face that we don't necessarily face in the Northland or Crossroads or other areas, that makes it harder and longer for us to develop. And we have to do a lot of convincing about political officials and even some city staff of, hey, this is why this needs to happen. This is what the private capital markets are saying. This is what the banks are saying needs to happen. You can't expect me to pull a rabbit out of a hat when I don't even have a hat, let alone the rabbit.
Okay, that's a good analogy. So on 63rd Street, how's that going so far? Because you had the groundbreaking when last year? Yeah,
February. Yeah.
So how's that going now?
You know what? It's going better. It's going better. I will say this. COVID presented a very unique challenge to the 63rd Street South Point project. The markets all changed. In terms of the type of tenants that were originally looked at for the area, folks who were no longer on board now, and it had a heavy office component. So we've had to come in, my partners and I, and we've had to work with our engineers and architects to redesign much of the site. It was heavy. The previous site plan was intense on office. We don't have that, and it was intense on big box retail. Well, guess what?
CVS closed across the street from you.
You got big box retail closing. Big box retail has changed. So many people are shopping online, and so we had to really come in with a new plan and redesign the site for tenants that actually make sense. But that also affects what we're looking at in terms of the TIF that's approved for the area. Because now if we don't have those big box tenants, then that means that's probably lesser revenue that's going to come in for the site, which means we need a bigger city commitment. So the city, just over a month ago, through the work of Mayor Pro Tem Park Shaw and Councilman Darrell Curls, and they committed $5 million for the start of the site work. That's huge. It's not enough. We need about another $27 million or whatnot from the city to really get to really make an impact, so that the plan that we have now fits the economics of the deal. But that was a huge COVID presented a huge challenge for the previous lead on the development.
Yeah, that's going to be difficult because not only CVS closed, Walgreens on 63rd and Truth closed as well. And now somebody's talking about plans for the landing as far as more affordable housing or housing in that area. So now is that a competition thing to see who can get it up running first?
No, it's not competition, because now we do have an element of affordable housing. And when we say affordable housing, we're talking about 60% or less when it comes to the area median income. So new development in city of Kansas City requires that if you're getting subsidies or incentives, that 10% of the housing has to be for 30% population at 30% AMI, another 10% at 70% AMI.
What's AMI for people that don't know?
Area median income.
Okay.
So the problem with that is that the economics don't work when you have those requirements, right? And so then
the math ain't math.
The math ain't mathing, because you want me to provide housing for a population that's making 30% of what everybody else makes, which means they have a rent that's based on their income. But I have bills, I have bills and construction costs that exceed that needs their income to be at least at a minimum of 80% of AMI, right? So that makes it problematic. So we're working with the city to try to figure out, how do we close those gaps? I say we're not in competition because what we do at CJR Development Partners is we grow businesses, we build communities, we change lives. We do that by bringing in mixed income. The problem with affordable housing on the east side, if I'm just really blunt about it, is that we concentrate all of the affordable housing on the east side, which means that you end up with a monolithic economic class, if you will, or predominantly monolithic economic class. So how can you, if I am, and I'll use Starbucks, if I'm Starbucks, I'm not building my business on incomes or household rooftops with 30% AMI. I can't build a business model there. I would say Papa Lou's, we couldn't sustain a business model there. And there are many other businesses that can't sustain where you have the majority of your folks are at low income. You got to have mixed income. So it behooves the city to really take on a strategy of developing more mixed incomes. And I'm not talking about gentrification, but more mixed income, to where now you can have working class families at 80% AMI, which there's several of our families are. But where do they go? They have to go to Lee Summit. They have to go to Blue Springs or elsewhere because they're priced out, and they're looking for better schools. But I would question whether or not they're really finding better schools in those places. That's a whole nother discussion. But they're looking for what they perceive as safer environments, and they're looking for a housing product that makes sense. We don't have a lot of new housing product in Kansas City.
Right.
So the other thing we have to look at is not only rental housing, but how does the city make sure that we have for sale housing for middle income earners as well?
And it's not just the schools; it's the amenities, grocery stores, and things like that. And one of the things that I hope that Emmett can work through, even with the Sunfresh, is that area having mixed income.
Yeah.
Because people that are in affordable housing per se can't afford to maintain a grocery store.
No.
It's just mathematically impossible. You got to have mixed income.
You got to have it. And the other thing, to your point about the Walgreens closing, CVS closing, so now you have a pharmaceutical desert, if you will, or a prescription healthcare desert.
People that need blood pressure medication.
Yeah.
I am yet to figure out how that's working like
and
that.
you got a community that has where chronic asthma is higher. So if I have a child that has chronic asthma and I need medication, where can I go? You telling me I got to go all the way to Hardesty and Independence, or I got to go to Brookside or the Plaza, or I got to go to Raytown? Man, that's criminal.
I have yet to figure that out. And what's alarming about it is outside the donut hole, CVS's. Well, but anyway, that's a whole nother conversation. But anyway, so as we wrap up today's show, first of all, thanks for coming out. But what do you see as far as your 63rd Street project developing? Is it going to be smooth sailing, or you already mentioned COVID has created some problems, but in our lifetime will we see housing development take place there? What about the Location 1 building? Is that in your scope or is that outside?
That's outside of our scope.
Okay.
We'd love to take a look at it because that building meant a lot to black businesses, many of which were lost after after the new owner came in.
Mm-hmm.
But we'd love to take a look at it. But yeah, we will see South Point at 63rd come to fruition in our lifetime. And your lifetime is, when I say our, both of us. And so we've got, first project out the ground is going to be a 122-key hotel. We started some land maintenance and cleanup. We used a black contractor, MVCO, that performed that scope of work. We have Talia Farrow and Brown. They're part of our engineering team. We have Harvick Law Firm, which is our attorneys, black law firm that's leading us in that endeavor. And then I mention all that because it's important. You gotta practice what you preach. I'm from Kansas City, and I tell people all the time, I gotta live here. I tell my partners, I gotta live here. And so, on the East Coast, we've done projects where we've had 40, 50, 60% black participation. And some would say it's easier because you've got more people to pull from, but it's also been very intentional. We have to have that same intentionality here. And even though we're working, for example, with our, right now, our general contractor for the entire site is McCown Gordon. But the demand we put on McCown Gordon is, hey, we expect a JV partnership. We're going to help you with the selection of that in that process. We expect subcontractors to come from our community. We expect the workforce to come from our community. So I say all that to say it's not just about the project coming to fruition, but it's how it comes to fruition that's extremely important. Because we could build it any kind of way we wanted to, and you have the buildings, you have shops and restaurants and all of that, but then you have the people still disinvested, still disempowered. So we also we talked a little bit about the housing component. We've got 222 units of rental housing that's coming. We have about 16 townhomes that are going to be for sale, townhomes that are going to front Prospect. We have an entertainment venue that's going to round out that northwest corner of 63rd and Prospect, which will have a pickleball entertainment type facility or whatnot with an outdoor court and indoor court. We're working on potentially an urgent care location there in partnership with HCA. HCA has come on, and we're signing an MOU to co-develop even the land that they have in that area so that we improve that corridor. We have a 24-hour child care center that will go up also on the east side of Prospect. And then we have some other opportunities. And right now, we have roughly 6 black businesses, including Kansas City Gift, that will have a retail incubator on the site. So we've been very intentional about how we look at bringing the project to fruition and making sure that it truly benefits the community.
All right. Marvin, good luck, and thanks so much for coming in and being our guest for today. And we appreciate you and all this information and knowledge that you have shared with us today. Thanks so much for watching. As always, I have the greatest viewing audience in the world. Till next time, remember, tough times don't last, tough people do. Until next time, peace.